And welcome back into Cleveland Browns Daily. Our pleasure to be joined by the great Andrew Berry, our general manager. And AB, I think we'll start here. Is this the most difficult interview you've ever done in the face of these hoodies, which I know the envy that you have that you don't have one of these yet?
I am very, very jealous that I don't have a Cleveland Browns Daily Radio Show hoodie. Where can I get one of those? Do you guys know a guy? Happen to know a guy?
These are the three.
Okay.
I mean, just saying. So I just want to get that out of the way. Just want to get that out of the way. I knew it would be tough. Here we are, man. Away we go. This is, I think for a lot of us, it's like, okay, here we go, start of the league. But you guys have been doing this work forever now that this is when this stuff really gets going. For you as you come back to this thing, what's most important as you walk in here? What's your agenda look like here over the rest of the week? Yeah, so it's definitely a very busy week. It actually starts off with a number of, I would say, non-team affiliated business, more league business with different committee meetings that we're on. Spent most of the day actually in league committee meetings. But then from there, it's really two-pronged. Number one, it's really the first time that we have kind of our first look at the upcoming draft class. We've done a lot of scouting and research and obviously hit the All-Star game circuit, but it gives us an opportunity to really spend some time with these individuals face-to-face, in person, which is really good. And then there's a fair amount of business that we have to take care of with our own roster before the start of the league year. So we'll meet with a lot of the representation from guys on our own roster and have those crucial and important conversations.
Speaking of our own roster, you got to get under the salary cap by the start of the league year. Today it was reported the Browns would be releasing John Johnson III. My guess would be post-June 1st designation to save some of that money. What was kind of the decision-making there, and how did we kind of come to this point?
Yeah, I think at this point there's really no certainty in terms of how that resolution will be reached, to be honest, Nate. But we did have discussions with John and his representation, and really appreciative of all the work that he's done over the past 2 years for us on the field and certainly in the locker room. But as we think about 2023 and moving forward, we just thought that that a parting was probably the best thing for the team.
So that creates a hole in the back end of this defense. Is this something, when you look at it with, Jim Schwartz going to play a little bit more single high than perhaps we've seen in the past? Are you looking for more of a true center fielder to complement Grant?
Really to be determined, to be honest. I think this was, certainly partly in conjunction with scheme, but it wasn't necessarily all driven by that. And without going into the particulars, I think how we look on that side of the ball, could take a bunch of different, appearances going into 2023,
sure,
depending on how things shake out the next several weeks.
Without the specifics, because I know you're not going to give them anyway,
right,
nor would we want to ask them at this point and make them public, but just big pictures, as you look at let's say it's a wall, how many contingencies are there for you at positions? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's probably hard to give a firm number, but I'll suffice it to say a fair amount. I think probably 2020 was maybe the only offseason where a lot of the, call it plan A or original plan, came to fruition. Oftentimes the next 6-7 months, they take a lot of different twists and turns. So we certainly do have a preferred approach as we enter the month of March and certainly the 2023 league year, but oftentimes it changes. So our big thing is we want to make sure that we stay flexible and we stay opportunistic, as opposed to so rigid that we can't adjust to either unexpected good opportunities or perhaps unexpected things that we hope didn't occur. So we've just got to be able to stay loose and flexible.
We talked about the salary cap earlier and kind of his planning for that. Right now some people, the Browns don't have any money. Just explain to people the mechanisms you guys have at your disposal between now and the start of the league year to free up space and then to be able to make some of the moves that I'm sure you are hoping to make when free agency opens.
Well, how about this? I will guarantee that we will be under the salary cap before the start of the 2023 league year. Quite honestly, I think that's oftentimes a maybe a difficult thing to fully appreciate within public spaces. I think number one, because most teams at this point, there's a little bit of a disassociation between how you manage the cap and how you actually manage your cash going into the league year, because the cap is really just an accounting mechanism for how you're going to spend on the roster or spend on the team. Within the cap accounting rules, there are a number of ways to create space. Whether it's a cut, releasing a player, whether it's trading a player, whether it's restructuring a deal, whether it's negotiating a real extension. So there are a number of tools at the disposal of NFL teams to create room. But you don't do any of these moves in a vacuum.
Sure.
You think about it, number one, holistically with the roster in the present year, but then secondarily, it's really kind of, at least we look at it over a multi-year span when we plan. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, our big thing is maintaining flexibility from year to year, and that'll continue to be our approach.
Maybe if you think of the off season as a pie chart, what percentage of that chart is this week in Indy on a prospect level? And then of that percentage, how do you weigh workout, individual meetings, medicals, the importance there?
I'd say this week is like maybe upwards of 5%, and probably in most prospects' case, maybe 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
And the ones that maybe fall in the 5% category are the ones that may have significant medical issues that need to be discussed or further vetted. Really the work that we've done for at this point the past, call it 10 months on this draft class, weighs more heavily than anything that they would do here. The medical information is something that you don't get till really this week. The interpersonal touch points are
Sure.
important, but even then you only get limited time, and we'll oftentimes wait people who have been with them at their universities for 3, 4, 5 years, outside of maybe a 20-minute exposure that we get in Indianapolis. But those touch points are important. They gear how much additional time we want to spend throughout the spring process. And then it's always good to see their physical characteristics in a controlled environment. But at the end of the day, those are very small pieces of the puzzle.
And it's a puzzle that involves free agency, and it's going to involve draft in terms of the roster construction puzzle. We have a lot of free agents. Take the linebacker position, for example. A lot of guys who played for you last year. We had so many injuries, but many of them are going to be free agents. Do you expect to kind of shore up anything prior to the start of the league year and solidify some people that have been here, bringing them back? Or is that something that you're kind of, we'll see how it all unfolds once we get there?
Yeah, honestly, it's yet to be determined. And that's
Okay.
not to say that, there aren't a number of individuals that we'd like to return to Cleveland, but the timing of that is really individual specific. I think we'll have a number of our players, that will hit the free agent market, and the market dynamics will determine whether they return or not. But one thing that I've learned over the past couple of years is it really is a bit of a marathon in the offseason, not a sprint. Like, everything doesn't happen in
Sure.
the first couple of days of free agency, whether it's retaining your own guys or signing other players or filling different roster needs.
One of the obviously most helpful things for this offseason is you're going to get a full offseason with Deshaun Watson. He's going to full training camp. He's going to get a full season, all of those things. As you look back on that, the chaos of all of that, of camp, going to 11, all of that stuff, and then the return, where does your mind go? Where's your perspective on what that process was like and how we handled it as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot, but, I mean, look, every organization is going to go through adversity. Every organization is going to go through challenging times at points in the year, and really our job as professionals is to navigate them. And obviously for us, really as we reflect on the entirety of the season, our results weren't good enough. But we're certainly, energized by the challenges of, improving the team, improving the organization, and making sure that, when we're here a year from now, we're a lot happier with the results from the season.
This is going to be your fourth draft in this time with the Cleveland Browns, your fourth offseason, fourth free agency period. Your first class that you drafted they're going to be their seniors now, right? They're going in the final year of those rookie deals. What's kind of been the biggest thing that you've learned, or what's maybe changed the most in your approach, if anything, about that you've gained from those past few years' experiences?
I think it's really just honestly patience and flexibility. Those would be the two biggest things. I think early on I used to worry more about things that I couldn't control or we couldn't control as an organization, and just the reality of it is whenever the league year opens, it's really a 7.5 month time frame until you get to the trade deadline, and you can no longer make significant changes
Sure.
with your roster. And the number of doors that'll open, and quite honestly, doors that may shut that you don't expect that happen during that time period. You can't predict, and staying flexible is key.
Speaking of that flexibility, you guys have been, I wouldn't say rigid, but it's clear that you have an age preference for people that you like to draft. With guys like Miles and Denzel and Nick, and now you have Deshaun kind of in their primes, and given that the COVID year has caused this draft class to have probably more older 23-year-olds in the top 100, does that change your approach in thinking about that age number at all?
I'd say not in particular, and I think maybe there's maybe the age preferences are a bit overstated. Look, we'll deal with each prospect or each individual based on their individual circumstances. I don't know that age necessarily equals readiness coming into the NFL. Just like youth doesn't necessarily mean that the players potential. So we really try to address it on a case-by-case basis.
As you're here, and you're not going to tell us, but I think it's from the outside, it's somewhat obvious some of the things that we need, right, going into this off season. How do you kind of divvy up that focus in terms of on the defensive line and working with a new defensive coordinator now in Jim Schwartz, and kind of figuring out, and you guys have history together, but figuring out what that looks like, because it's a minor shift. This is the first time we had a new defensive coordinator with a little bit of a different defensive style. How do you kind of focus in on honing in on what we want for this now, and kind of to build this team where, we've had veterans in the past, now we're counting either young guys to step up or step in, and then we still have free agency to fill in some veterans, but how does that kind of new marriage work and change kind of the outlook, if at all?
I don't think the process is that different. I mean, you always want to make sure that you partner with the coaching staff if you're a front office front office member. I think having familiarity with Jim, and quite honestly being in similar to systems to what Jim has done, during my time in Indianapolis, certainly helps. But I know Jim very well from our time in Philly. But even if we didn't necessarily have a working history together, I've always kind of come up in the model where the front office partners with the coaching staff, and you ultimately try and marry players and skill sets with the philosophy of the coordinators.
You mentioned Jim, Bubba as well, coming in, and a bunch of changes to the staff. What person were there certain traits that you guys were, and obviously it's Kevin's staff, but in terms it's the Browns staff, certain traits you were looking for in filling those positions? Were there any things we need a little bit more of this?
Yeah, I think it's I think number one, it's probably more appropriate to ask
Sure.
Kevin about it. But from my perspective, we had the opportunity to add two very talented coordinators and a number of other talented position coaches. I think that certainly, like with Bubba in particular, former player perspective, proven track record, really good teacher, passionate, fiery personality. I think those are all positives. And with Jim, I think he's called over like 400 NFL games, either as like a head coach or a defensive coordinator. Super smart, been a variety of places, former head coach. Again, another experienced guy with a proven track record, and I think both those individuals can make our organization better.
One thing about his defense, it's always had a Pro Bowl or All-Pro defensive tackle. We've got guys here that you've drafted, Jordan Elliott, Perrion's shown, I think, some flashes certainly over the second half of that season. How important is it to find that real interior disruptor? And, Deron Payne was a guy we all saw, like, oh, he'd be great. Well, they franchised him today. How important is that?
Yeah, I think people oftentimes want to put Jim in a box, and I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the case. Certainly everybody would love that player, but Jim is perhaps not as rigid or dogmatic as maybe people assume.
All right, this is a serious one. Are you finding it this year harder to trade with people after what you did in the Amari Cooper trade? Because I would imagine that when you do something like that, people are like, oh, he's into this? Maybe I'm not as into this. So we run into this in fantasy football all the time.
Yeah.
People you fleece me.
Zegura.
Yeah, you're not. They don't want to trade with you anymore.
I don't know about that. We'll see as we get into this week and the upcoming off season. But I think we're fortunate to be in a transactional league where people are more willing to be flexible with their roster. So we'll see.
Well, you got to be nimble, and I think that's one thing you've done that's very when opportunity presents, you've got to be ready to act, and it feels like you guys as a front office are always ready for that, and that's got to be such a huge part of the job.
No, it's It's needed. It's needed, and particularly in the current environment that the NFL's in, with it being a more transactional sport. So it's certainly something that we pride ourselves on, and hopefully we can pounce on opportunities this year as well.
Yeah, that goes back to what he was saying about having the flexibility with the cap, and to be able to, we want this guy, we can go get him.
That's exactly right.
Is this a fun time of year for you, or is it a stressful time, or both?
It's both. It's both, but probably more fun than stressful.
Yeah, get to go out there. We'll do some great things, get this roster going, and excited for another season here, and hopefully one, as you said, that meets the expectations of a team that has a chance, I think, to be very, very good.
Yep. Appreciate you guys.
Amy, thanks for your time.
All right. Thanks, Beau. Thanks, Nate.
Much more to come. You're listening to Cleveland Browns Daily on 850 ESPN Cleveland.